This is a breaking news edition of WNY Over the Air, and it's sponsored by all my Patreon members and channel members that support this channel directly. Thank you so much, guys, for your support. I really appreciate it. All right, so the NAB has just sent a formal petition to Brendan Carr in the FCC to adopt a firm ATSC 1.0 sunset date of February of 2028 in the top 55 markets of the United States, with the remaining smaller markets having a deadline of February 2030. There is a lot to unpack in this petition, so let's get to it. So first off, this is a petition that the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, wrote up and has sent to the FCC formally for the FCC to take action on. The ball is now in the FCC's court. This is up to the FCC now to decide whether or not they want to adopt some of this, parts of it, all of it, or none of it. They could completely say, no, we don't like any of this, and just completely not take anything that this has in here. I don't think that's very likely. I think something will come out of this. But first off, this is a very interesting PDF document that I've been looking at. The first thing that I thought of when I heard that flashy news headline of like 2028 sunset for the top markets, I was thinking, wait a second, the substantially similar rule, which is in effect right now, that mandates that broadcasters transmit an ATSC 1.0 variant of a channel that is on ATSC 3.0. That rule is in effect until, I believe, July of 2027. So I'm like, okay, if the NAB wants this in February of 2028 for like a lot of markets in this country, then that only gives them like 6-7 months for that time to transition. It turns out when you scroll further down in this PDF, that's one of the things on the bottom that they are saying here is they also want to get rid of the substantially similar rule. Who would have thought, right? So that makes a lot of sense. They are saying in this petition that the substantially similar rule is not necessary. They are asking the FCC to get rid of it right now and completely allow them to broadcast solely in ATSC 3.0 if they want to. Now, I wouldn't get too carried away right now, like, oh my God, I got to start going out and buying ATSC 3.0 equipment. The way that this works is you are the product for advertisers. Keep that in mind whenever you're watching over-the-air TV. What really, really matters to broadcasters is advertisers. That is their number one thing that they care about is advertisers. If advertisers start realizing, wait a second, almost nobody can get our over-the-air TV ads because now it's using this ATSC 3.0 signal that almost nobody has, they're not going to want to advertise. So trust me, the ATSC 1.0 channels will still be on the air. I just think it'll be a little bit more creative on how they keep them on the air. I believe this will be more of a nightlight situation if this actually does go through. Again, this is all just the NAB asking the FCC, but if the FCC were to do something like this, I think it would be more of a nightlight situation where you've got multiple stations, multiple ATSC 1.0 stations, all on one station, on one frequency, and there's a couple creative ways to do that. Either the FCC could adopt different rules regarding the use of MPEG-2 video and get rid of that so that everything, even the .1s, can be in AVC or H.264, or what they could do if the FCC still wants to keep the MPEG-2 rule in there, and this is something else that I've seen that's very smart, is they could keep the MPEG-2 .1 feed, but then lower the resolution and bitrate to a very low bitrate, 480i, keep the .1 channel in 480i, and then have an HD variant of that .1 channel in AVC. So you're still keeping the .1 channel in MPEG-2, which is a government rule that you have to have your main programming in MPEG-2. So you're still keeping it in MPEG-2, but it's just no longer in HD and the bitrate is really bad. But for the 90% of people out there that can receive AVC over the air, you would get that good high quality AVC feed in HD on one station. So that's one way that they could do that. If this petition does kind of come to reality in regards to a firm sunset for 1.0, expect to see this happening across the country. At least from what I know and what would be technically feasible, this is a very plausible scenario. I just want to touch base on the 2028 deadline. And when I thought 2028 in my head, instantly I thought of the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, California. So there's, I think, just holistically right now as a country, the US is focusing a lot on major infrastructure projects to be ready by the 2028 Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles, California. One of those that the broadcast industry wants is their goal is to have 4K broadcasts on the air by the time that the Summer Olympics are happening, because they want to broadcast our American California Summer Olympic Games in 4K over the air. So when other people come from other countries and are in the region, they can look at our broadcast infrastructure and say, hey, look, the US is broadcasting in 4K for their Olympic Games. It's kind of like a big climax to final transition to ATSC 3.0, and that's a goal that they've been setting. I hope that goal comes to fruition, but let me tell you, that's only like just a little over 3 years away, and I'll believe it when I see it. But I'm rooting for the broadcasters if they can do something like this by the 2028 games and have it over the air accessible, then that would be amazing. Brightline, which is going to be America's first private high-speed rail system, they want to have their system ready to go by the 2028 games. So this is just part of a larger kind of infrastructure approach that the broadcast industry wants to be a part of, to push the envelope. So that'll be interesting to see nonetheless, and I hope that we can get there. And that's partly the reason why they're setting that 2028 date for the largest markets. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is February 2028. If you think, what's in the month of February? The Super Bowl is in the month of February. So what's interesting about this is if you go and scroll down, when they list the 2028 February deadline, they literally tell the FCC, they're like, make sure that you set a date that doesn't interfere with major broadcast events like the Super Bowl. Like, for instance, you don't want to set a sunset date in February of 2028 where the sunset date is a day before the Super Bowl. And then everybody goes to try to watch the Super Bowl over the air, and since they only have 1.0 equipment, you can't get the Super Bowl anymore. And they're being explicit with the FCC about that. There's a lot of other stuff in here as well. There's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with. And this is just something else, too, that I noticed that I just want to share real quick. They have all of these footnotes that talk about the technical parameters for ATSC 1.0, and they always make it sound way worse than it technically could actually be. So they say that ATSC 3.0 provides the option for 1920 by 1080p at 60 frames per second, and that somehow ATSC 1.0 can't handle 60 frames per second for a progressive video feed. You can broadcast whatever you want over ATSC 1.0. It is a vessel for code. You could send AVC video at 60 frames per second progressive. And this document is filled with a bunch of stuff like this to make ATSC 1.0 look actually a lot worse than it actually is in terms of the coding aspect. And I hate it when they do stuff like this because this isn't true. I just brought up the official ATSC A72 document that talks about AVC at 60 frames per second progressive. And as you can see, frame rate 6 is exactly 60 hertz refresh rate, and 6 is an option for 1080 by 1920 for vertical and horizontal size. So this is in the actual spec, and yet they omit this. There's stuff about how data collection is not a concern. They don't really go into DRM all that much, which is not the best. They go into it a little bit for the cable and retrans kind of side of things, for the fact that they would literally be required to take that over-the-air broadcast signal with DRM intact and then use that for their cable systems, and how there could be kind of some issues with that. I think this is a really good time for all of you guys, or if you're part of the broadcast industry and you're watching this right now, to visit the link to one of the articles that I wrote it'll be in the description of this video, where I go into what needs to be done in an event that there is a transition, because this needs to be done carefully. I want this expedited. I am pro expediting ATSC 3.0, but we have to make sure that encryption is handled well. And I believe that my thoughts about how encryption could be handled are probably one of the best options available right now that could be implemented. And there's other things, other concerns that I have about how broadcasters could raise SNRs and make over-the-air TV not as accessible. So definitely check that out if you haven't already, or if you just forget, you can take a look again. I think it's a really good read. I don't want to just let the broadcasters go crazy because I'm concerned. There should be some very basic, the rules don't have to be that intrusive. They can be basic. They can be literally a sentence long. It doesn't have to be over intrusive, just something to make sure that consumers at least somewhat win in a scenario where ATSC 3.0 is adopted and it's the new standard in America. Of course, they go into other rules about how the FCC should enact changes to parts 73, 15, and 76 of the FCC's rules to achieve some of these things that they want to do. The other thing that this petition talks about is a need for a mandate of TVs including ATSC 3.0 tuners in them. And the date that they picked for that is February of 2028 as well. So they're saying that, hey, FCC, you should mandate that by February 2028, all TVs sold in the United States must include an ATSC 3.0 tuner in them. Now, at least in my opinion, in order for a transition to actually occur and be successful, you would need low-end TVs, budget TVs to have ATSC 3.0 tuners in them. You would need all TV manufacturers to be on board. This is something that would probably need to be done in order to make the transition feasible. At this point, if you're against ATSC 3.0 because of all the DRM and everything, and you just don't want it and you want to make sure that it just doesn't occur, I would say personally funnel that energy into making sure that DRM isn't intrusive. Not all channels on an ATSC 3.0 station have DRM, and make sure that DRM doesn't require an internet connection, like is the case with a couple ATSC 3.0 set-top boxes that can handle DRM at the moment. But really, this is all interesting stuff. I will leave a link to the NAB petition in the description below, and I will leave a link to my article that I wrote many, many months ago talking about what would need to be done in order to make sure that consumers' interests are at least respected. Anyway, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. I may make more videos as more comes in as the days go on. But anyway, thank you again so much to my Patreon members and channel members, and I will see you in the next video.